In this video, I wanted to show you some of the basics of a DSLR camera. Now, this is a Canon 80D, and I'll say that most of the cameras are all pretty much the same, whether it's Nikon, Canon, Pentax. Just the buttons are probably located in different places, and some of the features may be hidden a little bit differently than they are on a Canon. But since probably a majority of you have a Canon camera, that's what I'll probably use for you doing this demonstration. You'll also notice if you have one of the Rebel series that there are some things that are not on your camera that are on this camera. So just keep in mind that each camera is a little bit different, but some of those basic features and buttons are going to be the same between all of these cameras. So here's the camera, and you'll notice that we have the lens and then we have the body, and we'll talk about each of the parts of it here. Just first off here on the lens, you'll notice this is a 10 to 18 millimeter zoom lens. You'll notice on the lens itself it has information as far as what the lens is. There are a couple of different features. One is you can zoom in and out with it, getting in closer at 18, wider angle at 10, so you can be able to change that. On the side of the lens itself, it has buttons, a little slider switch for being able to do autofocus or manual focus. If you're doing manual focus, you would turn this outside ring here to do that. Below that is a switch for stabilizer, that is for image stabilization. I generally say leave that on except for more specific instances where it might not be needed, but for most cases, if you have that feature on your lens, go ahead and leave that turned on there. If you're exchanging lenses, you would press down on this button here and turn the lens like so, and it would come off like that. So Nikon, Canon have different mounts, so they come apart a little bit differently, but it's basically the same function for being able to exchange lenses on it. So let's take a look at the camera body here so that you can kind of see some of those different features that are on the camera itself. So when we turn it to the side over here, one of the things that you'll notice is that there are several ports on the side for being able to plug in things. So if you're shooting a lot of video with this camera, you would have a port for a microphone and for headset so that you could be able to hear the sound and record sound better. There's also ports for USB and for the HDMI, so if you wanted to be able to connect it to a computer and be able to see things, you can do that. There's also a port here for a wired remote release, so you can plug this in, have the remote release, press the button, and it would fire the shutter for you. Okay, up above here you'll notice that there is a button here. This is for turning on the flash on the camera, and if you were to press that button and have the camera on at the time, the flash would pop up. Okay. Now I really recommend not using the flash for taking photos because it tends to leave pretty harsh shadows and just looks not quite as good. So most times we're not going to use that. Alright, we'll come around to the back side of the camera here. And so on the back of the camera you can see we have our view screen that's on the back here. And I'll press this Q button, which is kind of a quick button for being able to see options within the camera itself, so you can see the screen on it like that. In this case, this one has a flip screen, so you can even be able to take and pull that screen out and turn it over to the side and be able to do different angles with it so that you can be able to see if you're doing video or other things with it as well. Okay, you can also turn it this way to protect it when the camera's not being used. So we'll flip that back. We have the viewfinder. This is where we look through the camera for being able to do our framing when we're looking at it through our eye like so. On the side of that viewfinder, you'll notice there's a little rotary dial on the side here. This is the diopter to adjust it to your own eye. So if you look through the camera and the lines and dots that you see within the screen look fuzzy, try turning this until it looks as sharp as possible for your own eye. Alright, so going on now, we have the menu button, which allows us to be able to access different items in the camera to change settings. We have the info button, which will provide information about the settings that are in the camera. Okay, it'll also tell you about pictures that you have taken when you have them displayed. We have a button over here which turns on the live view, which is where you can actually do your cropping and framing on the back screen. You'll see that kind of pop up here. It's also got the switch for turning to shooting video on it there too. There's that quick button which lets you be able to access those menus, and again this one lets you be able to see the last picture that was taken with the camera. Next up, down below here, so here's one of the differences between the Rebel series and this and more of the Pro series, is that there is a separate dial control here for being able to change your f-stop or other settings within the camera. Okay, so a lot of cameras don't have this. You have a button that you press up here, and then you use the top dial to change some of those other settings. Okay, so that's in here. There's a lock switch here to lock that to keep it from turning on you accidentally. This is the picture preview I think I mentioned, and then trash for being able to throw away a picture that you might not like. All right, other things that we have. This is autofocus on. This allows you to turn it back on and lock sometimes when you're focusing. This lets you be able to zoom in to see more detail within your picture. Okay, and that's pretty much on that side. On this side is where the camera card is located, so we pop it out and you'll see the card on the side here, like so. And we'll go on up to the top of the camera here. And on the top of the camera we see most of the major controls that we can use with the camera here. So first off, here's the shutter release. So when we get ready to take a picture, we'll just take and press that for being able to do that. Okay. Next up, this is a control that lets us change the shutter speed and also change some of the menu selections that we're working with. Right next to it is a little button that lets us be able to choose the autofocus points that the camera is going to use for focusing in the camera. Okay, we have a button here for turning and changing the mode of our autofocus. We have a button for changing the drive that we're using, one for the ISO, and one for the metering mode, how it's metering the light. There's also a little button here for turning on a display light so we can see it here. Okay, so basic controls, we'll talk more about how to work with those as well. On top is the flash shoe. This is where we can put on an external strobe so that we can add additional light to our photos. And on this side we have the control dial for choosing the exposure mode that we're going to use for taking our photos. Now, if you're just starting out with a camera and you've never used a camera very much before, then I would probably recommend that you change this to start off with the auto mode. That's that green one right here. Okay, so using auto means the camera is going to control everything. Now, the purpose of this class is to get you where you can control it yourself and use these other modes for being able to take pictures depending on what occasion that you need to use with them. Okay, and then on the other side is the on-off switch. Again, I recommend leaving it in the off position when you're not using the camera to help save your battery a little bit more. All right, so what else? That's kind of the basics of the camera itself and what different functions and features there are. The last thing I will point out is on the bottom, there's usually, you'll see like a 1/4 inch threaded hole in the bottom. I have attached a shoe onto the bottom of this for a tripod, so I can be able to mount it onto a tripod more easily and more quickly. So you have that capability of being able to mount it to a tripod to keep it nice and steady. So that's it. That's just kind of the basics here, kind of going over to let you be able to see some of those basic points of the camera and some of those basic controls, where they are and what they are, and we'll delve into a little bit more on how to use these controls to be able to take better photos a little bit later on.